Are you someone who uses Microsoft Excel in your work? Perhaps you've been asked to make a pivot table and you don't even know what a pivot table is or even where to begin. I use pivot tables all the time in my day-to-day work. So in today's video, I want to show you how to make a basic pivot table so you can analyze your data. Come along. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Tech Talk with Troy. Of course, I'm Troy, and today we're going to talk about making basic pivot tables. Some of you may not have heard of pivot tables, others may have in their work. This is in regards to using Microsoft Excel, and I'm kind of a data nerd, so I love using this tool in Microsoft Excel in order to analyze data. If you're new to my channel, we do everything tech talk, from electronics, drones, you name it. So come along and I'll show you how to make a basic pivot table. So here we have our Microsoft Excel open. And for today's illustration, I'm going to be using the Mac version of Excel, but I do use the Windows version at work, and it's very similar, so you shouldn't have a trouble going between both. So I've created a little table here of data. Of course, you will have your own set of data. Where I work, I could have anywhere upwards of 100,000 lines of data, which is where pivot table magic really happens. You can apply this to any size data set that you actually have to work with. So for today, I've just got a data set of like 20 items with just a few columns across the top. So once you have your data set, you got to make sure that each column heading is unique. That is one thing that sometimes the pivot table tool does not like, if things are not unique, or, I also try to avoid using weird characters, even though probably some of them will work. So what's cool about a pivot table is that you can take this data set and you can analyze it in many different ways. And so it really becomes a powerful analyzing tool when you're using Microsoft Excel to create these pivot tables. So what I like to do, since my data is usually on the sheet that is showing, I like to create a secondary sheet. Let's do that. And I'll just call it pivot table. Okay. And I'm going to increase this just a little bit so it's easier to see. So up on your tabs, your ribbon across the top, you're going to go to the insert part of the ribbon. And you'll see the first button here is pivot table. Usually it's the first button. Yours could be slightly different, but it should be on the insert ribbon no matter what. So you're going to hit pivot table. Okay, and you're going to be met with this dialog box. From here, it's going to ask you to select the table or the range that you want the pivot table to analyze. Okay, we're just going to be worried about this first top portion of this box for now. Okay, so then since our data is on sheet 1, all you have to do now is leave this dialog box open, and then you're going to go to sheet 1 and it will start filling in the blanks for you. So since this is such a small data set, you can actually just click on cell A1, hold the left mouse button, and then drag it all the way down to the last cell and column, which in this case is I-21. You can see that the pivot table filled that in. Now let's say you've got 20,000 lines of data. You can type that in right here, and I like to do that myself. Rather than drag it down and it takes forever, you can actually start maybe just dragging the first 2 rows and then scroll down to the bottom of your data set and see what the last row would be, the number, and then type that in. It just makes it go a lot quicker. Okay, So once you have your data set range entered here, as you can see, and you see that the pivot table tool entered that for you. Let me move this out of the way. And you can also see that there is a dotted line box highlighted around your data set. From here, you just click OK. All right. So then it takes you right back to your tab that you've got your pivot table located at, and it's blank. So really, it's just a matter of choosing which fields you want to analyze and how. The pivot table settings have 4 areas. First one I'll explain is the filters. So let's say you want to filter your data by one particular field or multiple fields. You would stick those there, and I'll show you how that works in a minute. The second one across is columns. So that would show up as columns in your pivot table. Then you go down and you see rows. This would be the rows, of course, in your pivot table. And then you have one called values. This is what you're analyzing, okay, or counting or summing or whatever. So those are the 4 areas of your pivot table. So let's look at our salespeople here. And we're going to, you can either click and drag the fields where you want, or you can just click the checkbox and it will land where it thinks it wants to go. And in this case, it actually did do it correctly because I would have dragged it down to rows. So as you can see over here, now that we've started our pivot table, it has filled in all of our salespeople. Let's say we want to see what region the sales individuals sold to, first of all. So I'm going to add this to the columns box. And you'll see across the top now that it's added our regions. Okay, I just use simple east, north, south, east, west for an example. And it also adds a grand total. Okay, so we don't have any data here though that we want to pull in. Let's start with, in our data set, I'll scroll down, and well, let's do something easier. Let's do how many orders. I'm going to add that to the values. Okay. Now, we know that order ID is not something that we really need to add up. And so that's what the values down here has done. You can see that it says sum of order ID. That doesn't make any sense to what we're evaluating. So what you can do is right click on that. And we're going to change this to not be a sum value, but we're going to count how many. Okay, there, that's much better. So I'm using the order ID field to count only how many records. I usually like to, if I'm looking for a count of something, I try to find a field that has something filled in for every particular record. And of course, our order ID does. Not every field might have something loaded into it. You might have blanks. That would not be a good field to use. So in this case, we're just going to use the count of the order ID. And now you can see that we've created a really simple pivot table. Okay, you can see James Brown here, the first line. He has a grand total of 5 orders, and you can see how they're split up by region. Next one, Tanner Bryan. He only has 1 in the East region. Brian Coolidge has 3 total, and 1 in East, North, and South, and so on. So you see that it took all of our data and it just put it in a nice package that you can actually analyze. And you see, it's always nice to double check how many records that it came back with. The grand total here, 20 records. That's how many were on our table. So we did good. Okay, so very simple to start with, pivot table. Now let's do the sales. Let's take that away and let's do the sales price and see how they did on that. We're going to add that. I'm going to drop and drag it down to values. And in this case, we can use the sum that it comes up with. Remember, you can change it to count or sum by right-clicking on the field and go to Field Settings. And as you see, it's already selected on sum. We already talked about count, and then there's others that you can use that we won't get into today. But most of the things that I do are either sum or count. Okay, now this is supposed to be money. You could leave it like this if you wanted to, but let's make it look like it's supposed to. So go back to our sum of sales price under the values area. Click field settings, and then there's a little box here called number. You can click that and change it to currency. Click OK twice, and you'll see now all of our sales prices are showing up as dollars. So this is cool because not only does it show you, you'll get those number signs if there's not enough space in the column. So not only does it show you each individual salesperson and what they did by region, and then their grand total, you can also see how the regions do individually. So in this case, immediately I can see that the South region did $235 worth of sales. Okay. And our top salesperson is Samantha Cotton. As you can see here, $282.52. And you can actually sort this if you'd like. Okay. You can right click, sort largest to smallest, and you can see how our top salespeople did all the way down. If that's what you'd like to do, you could sort it by any one of these items. Pretty cool. Let's do the product. So you see that it thought it should go under values, but I want it to go under rows. So you can drag and drop it where you want it to go. So here we have our products listed. You can change it, and if you want to look at how your products come out, and I'm going to put in the sales date as far as the columns go across the top. It's going to automatically add years, quarters, and sales date under the columns. Now, I like to get rid of quarters because I'm not usually interested in my data that way, but if you want to, you can leave it, and you can use these plus signs over here, and it will open up to quarter 1, 2, 3, or whatever's there in the data. Okay. But I'm going to get rid of quarters just by dragging it up and getting rid of it. Now I just have years, and it should have months when I do that. So there you go. But we don't have any data yet in there. So we're going to see how we did with our orders. And what I'm going to do is, again, drag my order ID down to values. I use this a lot. It's coming up with sum. Right click, and we're going to change it to count. I want to know how we did number-wise by date. Here we go. And I'm going to open this up by month. Okay. So we've got 2019 first, by month, how much we sold of each product, our widgets here. And then 2020. Okay, super cool. And then you can see how we did down here on the grand total line, either here on the row or by the actual product. You can see that here the square widget sold the most product. 4 in 2019, 3 in 2020. Super cool. But actually, this is only telling us the number of orders there were. Let's take the orders out, and we're going to bring in the quantity field to see how many of each product we actually sold, not the number of orders. You got to know what your data is telling you. Okay, and in this case, we're not going to do count because we want the quantity to add up. So we're going to keep it the way it is under sum. So this is going to show us how many of each widget we sold by month and year, not how many orders. Before we were counting orders, now we're looking at how many quantity-wise we sold of each part. We sold a total of 346 parts. that are in our data set, and you can see that the round widget we sold the most of here, more popular. Now, you can see if I click off of the pivot table itself that our help window goes away. So if you click back on it, it comes back and you can change it. You can also add more than one item to a row or column. Let's add our salespeople in to the rows here, and we'll put it above the product. So now we can see by salesperson how they did. You see here James Brown is our first salesperson. He sold round widgets, square widgets, and triangle widgets. And you can see how he did by date as far as quantity of items sold. You also see Tanner Bryan just sold round widgets and so forth. If you wanted to, you could add the regions in there. And you can move these around to what you think make more sense. So here we go. Now we've added the region. James Brown sold in the North region 5 square widgets. In the South region, he sold 35. And in the West region, he sold 100. And it breaks down the widgets there. So all kinds of ways to show and display your data. Okay, one thing I want to mention is when you get your pivot table looking the way you like, I like to go up to this design area, pivot table. You've got 2 extra tabs that help you work with your pivot table. And I like to change the design a little bit to some of these preloaded because they look better sometimes. You can also add, sometimes I like to add lines, just simple like we do in Excel, and center things so they're easier to read to make it look better. But there's all kinds of presets that you can choose. So let's clear this out. Okay, and let's add our salespersons back into the rows. And we see that we have closed and open orders. So we're going to drag that to the columns. Very simple. And I just want to count who's got open orders and who has closed items. So we're going to go back up to the order ID, one that I used for my counts. Change this by right-clicking and make it say count instead of sum. Now you can see who has closed orders and who has open orders and the grand total. Really quick and easy way to evaluate data. Looks like it's even 10 to 10. So I did want to go over briefly the filters quadrant of the pivot table settings. So as you can see, we've been looking at the open and closed orders, the count. So let's see how using the filter section can make your pivot table different. We're going to add the region, drop and drag it into filters. Once you do that, you're going to see that your pivot table now has an extra area at the top that you can click on, and you can actually do a filter. So let's say I only want to see the closed and open orders for the East region. I'm going to unselect everything and just choose East. Okay, and then you'll see that the East region is chosen, and we're only seeing the numbers closed and open for the East region. You can add the North, take the East away, and see how it changes. Okay, really cool. So the filter function is helpful when you want to kind of narrow things down to a specific piece of information. Anything that you can choose. Let's take the region away and we can add product. So now if we only wanted to see it by product, let's look at the round widget. You can see which of the round widgets are closed and open orders. So I hope that was helpful to see how a basic pivot table is made. It's just a matter of dragging and dropping your fields that you want in the order that you want to evaluate them. And really, you can play around with it to see what the results are. That's what I do when I'm like, I don't even know how I want it to look, you know what I mean? So play around with the fields, put them in different parts of the quadrants that you see there, the 4 sections, and see how it comes out. And you might see something that actually looks better than what you thought. So I hope you like this video. I would appreciate it if you give me a thumbs up, leave a comment in the comments below. I'd love to have you as a subscriber. If you would, hit that subscribe button so you can get notified of future videos when they come out. Until next time, thanks for watching Tech Talk with Troy.